Sure. I am Kathy Nguyen Li, and I'm 39 years old. I'm a licensed psychologist in DC and Virginia. So I have a private practice in DC, but it's all telehealth since the pandemic. Um, and work full time, but also write on the side. Um, Hopefully, at some point, might become a paid writer, but we'll see. Sure, sure. Yeah, so my parents are Vietnamese refugees. They are boat people. They left Vietnam in 1980. And just some circumstances around that. Um, so my parents had a son in Vietnam in 1979. He passed away within a day or two, and they said that he seemed healthy when he was born, but maybe somehow got sick, and they just didn't have the equipment in the hospitals to be able to save his life. So that was like an important context in terms of just like their life in Vietnam. They also struggled financially after the fall of Saigon, um, and they lived like in a small town very close to Saigon. Um, and then in 1980, I think it was early in the year, my dad said that he was arrested by the government, wrongfully accused of being a North Vietnamese soldier who deserted. And so they arrested him, put him in jail. And scared for his life, he found a way to escape. I think he said he punched a guard out and ran. And then at that point, my parents decided they really needed to leave Vietnam. My parents and my aunt, my mom's sister, all left on a boat. Um, and I think they said they made it to um, Singapore, but then maybe was not accepted there, and so they had to go to Indonesia. And I think there they were accepted, let in, and then spent some time at the refugee camp, and eventually, I think was sponsored by like a Baptist church in Virginia to come to the States. And so they, I think, spent some time in California, but eventually settled here in Fairfax, Virginia. And they had some family here, not a lot, but maybe that's why they ended up in Fairfax. Um, and so that was in 1980. My mom was actually maybe like a few months pregnant with my oldest brother who's still alive. Um, and then so she had him here. My middle brother, my oldest brother is Min. My middle brother, his name is Huang, but he goes by Philip. And then they had me, the youngest, and they just named me Kathy because they were just tired of people screwing up Vietnamese names. Um, so I was just Kathy Nguyen, no middle name even. um, and then, yeah, again, all of us were born and raised here in Fairfax. Um, it sounds like for the most part, they settled in as well as you would, can expect. Had a lot of support just from like neighbors, and then were on welfare. Um, they immediately tried to sort of get some education, and eventually just sort of get some jobs. I think they got just random jobs wherever they could to get make some money. My I asked my parents if they were like scared when they came, and my mom said that she wasn't because as stressful as it was, it still felt better than her life in Vietnam. So she said she was for the most part happy. Of course, they missed their family, but I think she said nothing can be done about that. My dad said that he was really anxious, and maybe it's just because he's the male, the father, he feels like he has to provide for the family. So he definitely worried about money. Um, I think they both like worked in like a janitorial position in a hospital. Um, my dad eventually took English classes and like engineering classes to train to be an auto mechanic, which he did for most of his life until he retired. And then my mom was pretty much a stay-at-home mom. She did work as a seamstress on the side and did some nannying on the side too. I, fortunately, there's a pretty solid Vietnamese community here. So I think they were as tried to be plugged in that community. I remember going to Eden Center a lot as a kid. Um, and my aunt and uncle even had a store in Eden Center. Um, and so, they tried to just, um, get support from just fellow Vietnamese people. Um, we always had a lot of support from our neighbors. They were often white, but just, really compassionate, kind people who tried to help us out wherever they could. Um, Not necessarily financially, but even just like getting us clothes, getting us um, just supplies, games for the kids, things that we might need. Um, and then again, they were on welfare, so they got financial support through that. And then just like by saving money eventually, um, they were able to buy a house when I was 5. So maybe that was almost 10 years um, from getting to the States. So it was like a slow process of just working as much as they could and then just getting whatever aid they could from other people. Yeah, Vietnamese food is definitely comforting to me. Um, it's funny, I don't eat a lot of it because I ate it at home, right? I never went out to eat because we didn't have money. So we never went out to restaurants. My mom would make Vietnamese food. So I'm not used to going out to eat for Vietnamese food. And so now I'm just not, like, I don't think to go out to eat Vietnamese food. But my daughter loves Vietnamese food. My husband loves Vietnamese food. So we do eat it. Um, but I love just the classic dishes for um, egg rolls. I really love it. My mom makes the best egg rolls, and I wish I knew how to make it, but I just can't. Um, the the Vietnamese desserts are very comfort food for me. Like I crave those a lot, and there's just something very comforting about that. I mean, most of like the noodle soups. Um, my husband loves the bông bò Huế, and so he eats that a lot. Um, of course, like the grilled pork, grilled shrimp, the vermicelli noodles. I love like the patties, um, and I really love when it's like steamed fish that you wrap in the rice wrapper, and you dip that in fish sauce. You can't get that very often around here, but I love that too. My mom taught me how to make bung bar because it's again one of my husband's favorite Vietnamese dishes. So I wanted to make it for him. And by taught, I just mean like she made it in front of me, and then just guided me through it. But they don't have measurements, right? She was just like a big spoon of fish sauce, right? And so I would just write a big spoon of fish sauce. Looking back, I probably should have just measured it myself, right? But my husband is a much, much better cook than I am. And so, to be honest, he cooks everything now, including the Vietnamese food, because he just makes it better than I can. So I don't, I think Bung Bar Hui was the only one that I've made some other stuff like Ganjur I've made, um, but not for like a long time. These days, I mostly just get recipes from online. Um, just because again it's more accurate than what my mom might be able to tell me. Sure, absolutely. I mean, I love food, and we are big foodies in this house. I I think part of I love eating with my family, friends, everybody. I think part of that was growing up because my parents were busy and they worked so much. Sometimes, like my dad would work 2 jobs, and so he wasn't even home for dinner. Like he would work a day job and then work in the evening. Um, so we didn't really eat dinner together as a family. Even if for the times where he wasn't working a night job, um, I can share more about this later. But like my parents, they definitely struggled, especially I think as we got older. Like my dad, I'm pretty sure was depressed. My mom definitely had anxiety. So my dad was very withdrawn from the family. He would usually the parents would eat in a different room watching TV, and then the kids would eat in a different room watching TV. So we never ate together as a whole family. And if we ever did, it would be really awkward. Like we wouldn't talk to each other. And so it's, I wanted to, but more so from like I wanted to have a family that did that together. If my family tried to do it, it just would be awkward. No one would really talk. So like now I love eating together with my family. Like I really, that's very important to me. Um, Usually when we have get together with my brothers, it's food. Food is almost always involved. Um, we all just love to eat Vietnamese food, but just other cultures as well. My husband is Chinese. Um, my brother's wife is Colombian American. They adopted a son from Korea. And so like we usually try to like eat all kinds of foods and incorporate all kinds like all of our cultures into our traditions. Um, I you know I I do wish I had more of a was more Vietnamese. Um, I think because again my parents were just so busy and just struggling in different ways. They didn't necessarily like work. Um, it wasn't necessarily a priority at that time for them to sort of pass down these traditions. Um, Even like they would speak to us in Vietnamese, but we never did any actual. We never learned Vietnamese formally in terms of taking classes. And then again sometimes they weren't even home, so sometimes we were like latchkey kids, right? We would just come home and take care of ourselves, and so um, my Vietnamese isn't great, and I wish I had more knowledge and connections to my culture, but um, I still appreciate the ones that I have. Um, I I would like my um, I guess like the particularly the refugee experience. I would like to pass down in the sense of I would want my daughter to know that part of her history. Just because I think I'm very proud of my parents, and I might get emotional talking about it. Even though again they really struggled, and I wouldn't say like our childhoods were easy. Um, I know that they were very resilient people and worked very hard, and I'm very proud of them. And I would want my daughter to know all of that. I think particularly because of how um, just Asian people in the U.S. are seen by the larger culture, particularly like refugee communities and to some extent immigrant communities, right? They're viewed as at times being lazy, at times, um, taking advantage, right? Um, Maybe not wanting to sort of work hard or taking other people's jobs, but that's just not at all like my experience of like my communities. Like very hardworking, they just want as much of a chance as anybody else. Um, and again, I'm just really proud, and I would want my daughter to know that that's part of her history. That's the people that she comes from. Um, I She's 7 years old, so I, I think it's haven't quite found a way to share that with her in a way that's like age appropriate. She knows that, of course, she's Vietnamese and Chinese. She knows that I was born in the States, but my parents are from Vietnam, and same for her paternal grandparents. But and she knows that they were, you know, like impoverished for a period of time, but doesn't really understand war, doesn't understand why they had to leave. But eventually, I do want to share all those stories with her. I think because um, I mean, again, it's something I'm proud of, but also in my own experience, my parents didn't necessarily talk about that because it's very, very traumatic for them. And again, they're just trying to survive. Yeah, my parents were, quite traumatized. And so they didn't and still don't like to talk about what happened. Um, and so they never talked about it. I knew for the longest time I just saw them as immigrants. And I don't remember the exact age, but I was older, maybe even like high school, when it like really clicked for me that they're refugees. Um, and because they never really talked about their experience, they just would just refer to it as when they came to the U.S. Um, but then I think the more I learned about just Vietnamese communities in general and Vietnamese history, I was like, oh wait, it's a little bit different. They were refugees. Um, but I didn't, even the details that I shared of like the circumstances of them leaving, I didn't find that out until I was in grad school. Um, and it was because I was in a family therapy class and we had an assignment to do like a family autobiography. And so I asked them if they would be open to talking to me for my school project. And of course, they're so supportive of school. So that was the only time they have ever shared these details, was so I could do well in school, pretty much. So yeah, I do get why they needed to do that. I don't blame them for that, but I do feel a disconnection. It's part of my disconnection that I feel sometimes with my Vietnamese heritage, and so I again would want to share as much of that as I can with my daughter, with Emma. I want her to have that um, connection in any way that she can. Oh, absolutely, yeah. I and that's where like I don't fault them for that, right? Like I if I were in their shoes, I have no idea if I would be able to survive like they have. And so I don't fault them for any of those things. I think they really did do their best, and I think they did well in the circumstances. Um, but yeah, I think it's so overwhelming, right? Like all of the emotions, um, and they're just trying to survive. And so there's a sense of like, in some ways, that they're in this perpetual life or death situation. Like obviously, at certain points, literally life or death, they could die at any point. But even after they got to the States, again, they're still trying to survive. They don't have money to feed their kids, right? Like there's still a sense of life or death there. And so they're just focused on surviving, getting through the day, not necessarily feeling their emotions, understanding their emotions, understanding their history. If anything, that could have made it harder to survive if it's really overwhelming, paralyzing. Um, and so if they had to really cut themselves off and suppress those things, um, I think because in some ways that trauma, right, was so long, by the time we were much more settled and like financially more secure, um, I don't, I just think they just didn't want to anymore. Maybe it wasn't a survival thing, but it's just painful and maybe just didn't want to, or just maybe didn't even know how anymore because it had been so long, like just decades, right? Um, and my parents didn't have a great relationship with each other. And so in some ways, I still think that even though it wasn't a life or death thing, I don't think there was a lot of emotional safety, because um, they can just cut off from their family from home. They have family here, thankfully, but even like between them, there wasn't much closeness or emotional safety. Um, and so yeah, like why would you cry? Why would you talk about those things if there's no comfort around you? So yeah, I don't blame them, but obviously growing up with that was definitely challenging for the kids in different ways. Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely like literal translation, right? So, because we grew up here, we were pretty much native English speakers. Um, and so definitely played that role that you hear so much in immigrant families, a little bit that parentified role and having to sort of mediate for parents, translate for them. Um, but I did feel that on an um, I definitely had that mediation role in other ways too, like between like my parents and maybe my brothers. So what I'm thinking about is specific time. I was in college at this point, but my oldest brother, Min, wanted to move out after he came home after college and lived at home for a while, but then wanted to move out, get his own place. And that was so strange to my parents, to my mom especially, because he was not like he was getting married. Why wouldn't he just want to stay home and save money? She didn't understand why he would want independence, like why that would be worth paying money for. And so like I remember mediating between them. My brother just didn't bother really explaining it, or maybe he did a little bit, but eventually just gave up. And I was closer to my mom, and so I would explain to her why he's doing this. Right, like it's different from Vietnamese culture and in American culture. This is very, very normal for kids to do. So definitely play that role, mediating between cultures in that way. Um, Emotionally, I definitely remember holding a lot of their emotions. I don't think I ever had anyone I could share with, so it's not like I was translating, but um, I was very anxious as a child, had separation anxiety, had OCD as a child. And I think that was just a lot of the anxiety I was holding from my parents, especially my mom. Um, I think also just like seeing them struggle, and they just didn't seem happy. Even as a child, I think I just knew, right? Like they didn't seem happy. And so I would worry about them in that way too. And so I had a lot of anxiety that I think they just maybe weren't feeling. Um, I don't know if that's just because I'm a psychologist now, I am a therapist. And so like I think I am just a little bit more attuned to people's emotions just naturally. Um, I think my mom would at times like tell me stuff that she really shouldn't have told a child, in terms of her own anxieties or about her relationship with her dad. I mean, my dad, her husband. Um, and so, again, because she didn't have anyone to confide in, she confided in me, and then I'm left holding her emotions. I still think it's really funny that I ended up becoming a therapist with people basically confide in you. But it's different because, I'm giving consent, right, to be a therapist, um, which I did not give as a kid, right, or could not give as a kid. And I'm much more resourceful now in terms of being able to help people, which I was not able to do as a kid. So it's, for me, to be a therapist is actually quite healing in some ways to be able to do that, because I felt so helpless as a child, and it doesn't feel that way anymore. I think I was often trying to like make sense of like what was going on between them too. Again, I don't think I shared any of this with anyone, but I think it was just like my own questions, my own struggles, seeing with like the family dynamics. And so I would translate in my head in terms of like, why are they doing this? Why are they responding this way? But um, I don't, again, I didn't really have anyone to talk to as a kid about those things. So I in some ways I identify more as Asian American than I do Vietnamese American. Um, and um, in some ways I do. It's one of those things, right? It's like I do feel very Asian American, but if I'm with a group of all Asians, and let's say they're all like East Asians, I do feel not fully belonging. I do feel like that Vietnamese side is there that feels kind of invisible in that context. Um, but for the most part, I do feel the most sense of belonging with like fellow Asian Americans, especially second generation Asian Americans like me. Um, I grew up with a lot of, not a lot, some Asian friends, um, but I don't think I knew any. I didn't think I had any Vietnamese friends. So it was like my best friend was Korean. I had some friends who were Chinese, Filipino, so all sorts of different sort of ethnicities. But I don't think I had any friends who were Vietnamese until maybe like middle school. Um, and so for the most part, I just saw myself as Asian and like had connection to fellow Asian people, but not as like specific to Vietnamese. In some ways, my Vietnamese, it's interesting. I feel most Vietnamese when I'm like talking to a Vietnamese adults, elders. But then it's like there's this power dynamic there. So it's like I don't know how to relate to Vietnamese people as peers because I never had Vietnamese peers growing up. Um, Most of the Vietnamese people I knew were elders. Um, and so I remember when I was in visiting family in Germany, when I was in grad school, I went on a trip with my brothers to Europe. Um, and we have second, third cousins in Berlin. And so they're our peers. Um, and they speak German and Vietnamese, and we speak Vietnamese and English. So the only language we could communicate with each other in was Vietnamese. So I would, I had to speak with them in Vietnamese. And I kept using language that I would use as if I was speaking to someone who's older than me or who's someone who has authority over me. And they're like, why do you keep saying those words? Like, we're just peers. But again, I didn't know how to connect with like Vietnamese peers because I never really had them. Um, Even with my brothers, we always spoke to each other in English. We never used Vietnamese with each other. Um, in some ways, I guess it's like depending upon the context. Again, I feel more Vietnamese in some contexts. In other contexts, I don't really feel Vietnamese. I feel more just Asian American. Yeah. So as an adult and like interacting with other Asian Americans and Vietnamese Americans, it's interesting. I definitely feel more anxiety or insecurity talking to Vietnamese Americans. Um, and just as an example, I've been doing like different screenwriting writers groups, right? And like especially if it's someone's Asian, because a lot of my stories are very Asian centered, and so I really want to get their notes and just sort of brainstorm with them. But I've noticed I feel more anxiety when I'm talking to a Vietnamese American screenwriter, and it's just because I'm just scared that they're going to judge me for not knowing, for not being Vietnamese enough. Even though that has never happened, that just lingers in the back of my mind, and it doesn't come up in the same way when I'm talking to other Asian Americans. One, because we're just not talking about Vietnamese culture in any way, which I guess is not great. Like again, there's a sense of like erasure of like Southeast Asian Americans. But in some ways, it feels safe, and that like I feel like I can blend in, versus I feel like I'm gonna be caught somehow as an imposter if I'm with other Vietnamese Americans. It's so weird because like in some ways, like when they reference Vietnamese culture, there's a part of me that does resonate, right? There's a part of me that loves it, but then there's a part of me that immediately gets anxious. I'm like, oh shit, like they're gonna see through me. It's so strange. It's so strange. But that's just, yeah, that's how it feels. Yeah. Well, I would say it's definitely it's anxiety that I feel outside of like other writers and other screenwriters too. And so um in some ways, I think my husband has more Vietnamese friends than I do. And so when we're around his friends, I feel the same kind of anxiety. And my husband is 1.5 generation, and so his friends are also 1.5 generation. So um, they have more of a strong connection to their Vietnamese heritage than I do. So even with them, I still have that same kind of feeling. But with screenwriters specifically, the stories that I've written so far center Vietnamese people. And so like it's like they're reading this story and I'm wondering, what do they think, right? Does it feel authentic? Do they feel like I am embarrassing Vietnamese people? Like there's that like pressure to represent your people in a way that's accurate and positive. And when my first story goes into like mental health stuff, and so I try to be very authentic, and it's not all pretty stuff. And most people have been receptive to it, but there's that anxiety of like, am I portraying my people, my family, my culture in a poor light, even though I'm just trying to highlight some of the less pretty parts. That is part of every culture, right? But there's that anxiety that shows up there with other writers. Yeah. I mean, I think both of the features that I've written absolutely touch on resilience. The first one um, highlights a little bit, it's a little bit more of a drama. It highlights a little bit more of the trauma that's part of the culture, or the refugee experience. Um, so it's both, right? Both the resilience, because you can't have resilience without struggle. But it highlights the struggle a little bit more. The second feature I've written is more of a comedy. It still has its trauma in there, because that's just my thing apparently. But it has a lot more just like that resilience piece, and I do think that's like again, both of these pieces I think are incredibly important to the refugee experience, both the trauma as well as the resilience. And I feel like, I mean, some stories maybe focus more on the trauma, which is fine, but I do feel like sometimes that's a narrative that the mainstream culture wants to see, right? And they don't focus necessarily on the resilience or just the normalcy, if you will, right? Just them existing as anyone else. And I think at least right now, most of my stories touch on both, find a balance between both. If there's like forgotten elements or like narratives that I want to like pass down. Yeah. I mean, one thing that's important to me, I feel like, so when people think about the refugee experience, often they think about that initial displacement time, which is obviously absolutely a really important part of that experience. But I don't feel like a lot of people, at least in mainstream culture, thinks about what happens after they arrive on safe soil, right? Like they think, okay, they're safe now, they're good to go. But that's just the beginning in some ways, right? And just like, I was talking about earlier, there's a lot of like emotional safety that's still not there, that they're still trying to find. And so I feel like that part of the story is really important to me to tell. And in my first screenplay, it's called Refuge. And it's about daughters of Vietnamese refugees, two women that the story centers around. And when I was first writing and getting notes, one note that I got from a white woman was that she didn't like the title because she thought refuge, people think of it like maybe like an Oscar-winning drama about like the displacement process. And I'm like, well, yeah, but that's not the only part of the refugee experience. And the fact that she couldn't even like connect it with like what she's reading, but that's also part of the refugee experience, to me was like, this is why it's really important to tell these stories, right? Because it's also part of the refugee experience, the way that in that story, the older generation still has not fully healed. Not that you can ever really fully heal, right? But the ways that they're still experiencing some of that trauma, or still trying to heal from that trauma. And then also the next generation, the ways that they are experiencing that intergenerational trauma and still trying to heal, and it lives on in them. And I do think that's an important part to tell that you don't hear as much. And in part because, again, how do you find that balance between honoring your parents, honoring your family, honoring everything they went through, but still being honest about the hardships, right? And I feel like as a therapist, I'm like probably one of the best people who could really tell that story in an authentic but responsible way, because I do think it's important. Like there's a way to name, harm without blaming people, right? And I feel like a lot of people in even just immigrant families, there's a lot of hardships, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma, and we can empathize with those older generations, but then also recognizing we have been harmed too. And part of our healing is being able to explore that and talk about that and get care around that, in a way that, again, doesn't have to shame sort of the older generation. But I think because of like a lot of Asian culture and that the saving face, like you shouldn't air your dirty laundry to outside people, like there's a lot of that that's in the culture that kind of suppresses or wants to erase those things. So like I'm constantly kind of working around that, like would I ever want my family, if I ever was fortunate enough to sort of have this movie be made, would I ever want my family to see it? I don't know if I would, if I had to be honest. Because I think it would be really hard, even though it's not meant to again, shame or blame in any way. But yeah, I think that's an important part of the narrative that is erased or not talked about enough, especially as a therapist. And I work with a lot of Asian Americans, like especially second generation Asian Americans. There's a lot of trauma there. Like there's a lot of pain that I think is really important to see. I guess basically to embrace their identity in whatever shape and form it looks, embrace their stories and experiences in whatever shape and form it looks, because I think there is so much diversity there. And sometimes, just speaking from my own experience, but I know like others often feel this way too. Like you're trying to fit in so much, or you're trying to sort of belong, because what child does not want to belong, right? And so you just grow up looking around you and trying to fit with what you see versus, and again, I think that's just sort of instinctual sometimes for kids. But as we grow up, and if there's a way to kind of look inside oneself more, and foster that and believe in that and share that, because I think everyone has their own story and their own identity, and all of it has a place, right? And so I guess I hope people give themselves permission to do that, even if it's uncomfortable and painful, that there's something still beautiful and worthwhile there. I mean, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I guess it's like just around maybe the other part of the narrative that I think I wish would be explored more is just mental health, like mental health in Asian American communities. Like, again, there's still such a strong stigma around mental health in general, but I think especially it feels like in a lot of Asian American communities. I remember when I in undergrad, and I already knew I wanted to be a therapist. And I tried to explain to my mom what I want to do, and she had no idea what I was talking about. Like, she's like, "You want to do what?" Like, and I didn't have like the language to be able to really explain it either. But she just had no reference for understanding that. That you're like a healer, but you don't heal physical injuries, right? It's like emotional things, and she just didn't really get it. And yet again, there's just like at times I think there's a lack of awareness, just ignorance about just mental health pieces, and I think but there's so much like mental health struggles that are not being, again, named or seen or worked on, and so I think that would be really important, even just within my own family. Again, I do believe my dad was depressed. My mom had a ton of anxiety. I'm a couples counselor, and so like thinking back on their relationship and their marriage is like really fascinating too. Kind of just thinking about those dynamics, and it makes me sad because I guess it didn't have to be that way. I think part of the issue, right, is these resources are not available. Like especially back then. Again, they if they saw a white therapist, would that person really be able to help them and understand them and support them? Even now, like people of color struggle seeing white therapists sometimes because they can't understand or support them, and sometimes might do harm. And so, especially back then, like so few resources, so they could not access therapy, and it probably wouldn't have been very helpful for them. But to me, it's just sad that like they didn't get care that they really did deserve and need, and even around their relationship, for themselves, individuals, for the whole family. To me, I think that's sad, and that's an important part to kind of just talk about and explore too. Just these mental health pieces that. I think sometimes people just chalk it up to it's just part of the culture, but it's really not. Like some of it might be, but some of it's just like it's part of trauma. It's the intergenerational trauma that so many people in the community now have. So it feels like it's culture, but it's not. Right? Again, it's something that is trauma that the whole community has experienced, and they're all seeing these things. They seemed fine with it. Fortunately, my parents were very hands-off as parents. Again, part of it was just they were just so withdrawn, but so they never put pressure on us to choose certain careers, and I think a few years after that conversation with my mom, where she didn't know what a therapist was, she said that she watched a movie and saw a therapist, and she's like, "Oh, so I know what you do now," and that meant a lot to me. Like I had a sense of like, "Oh, she gets it," and maybe appreciates it on some level, right? Um, I still don't think she fully gets it because this was a while back, but she encouraged me to do therapy in Vietnamese. And I'm like, I cannot never do therapy in Vietnamese. I just don't have the language proficiency to talk about emotions. You need like a high level of proficiency in like abstract concepts. It's like, I can't do that. And she's like, why can't you just ask them what's wrong? And I'm like, that's not entirely what I do. Um, I think there's still aspects that she doesn't really fully get. But they seem okay with it. Um, I think but they don't necessarily ask a lot of questions about it, and sometimes that makes me sad that they don't seem interested in it. I don't know if that's just because it's mental health related or just gender dynamics, because they'll ask my brothers stuff about their jobs, but they don't ask the woman about her job. They will ask me about kids, right? So this like gender stuff there. Um, um, but and I don't think they know that I write. I don't think I've shared that with them. um, I mean, even though I've always loved writing, it never seemed like a viable career choice. And like, from a very young age, I knew that my parents were not going to be able to help us financially. And so if we wanted to get by in life, it was on us, right? So I knew we had to do well in school. And it just seemed like to be a writer was just too risky, right? Like I didn't have any connections. I wouldn't have any fallback. And so it just never felt like a viable career choice. But I also love like psychology, so I don't see that as like settling. That's definitely something I feel called to. But I also have always loved writing. So only when I reached my own kind of level of like financial security, I felt like, oh, maybe I can explore this a little bit more. Um, and I guess I haven't shared it with them. I don't know if they would understand, right? Some of the messages I've gotten is that it's something you do for fun. It's not something you do for a career, or it's not stable enough. It's not secure enough. Um, the stories that I write, like, what if they ask to read it, right? And like, would I want them to read it? I don't know. It's also like it's just I don't know this. It's a very personal part. It's a part that means a lot to me, and I'm generally very careful about what I share with my parents, just because I don't think they're the most supportive, emotionally and supportive. And again, I have a high bar of what emotional support looks like being a therapist. So I just don't share a lot of things with them in general. Um, definitely. Like there's a sense of I think that's what it is, right? Like in some ways, I put so much of myself in my stories, and not necessarily like literally myself, but like the things I believe in, the things that are important to me. I will put that in. But what if my own parents, read it and they don't like it, or they don't understand it, right? Like there's something very inherently painful about that, of like showing yourself and then they reject it, right? Like, and I feel like there's elements of that has been so much of my just life experience with them, that this would just replicate, right? That just sounds extremely painful. I don't know if I want to go through that. or or the flip side is, what if they do like it? What if it does resonate with them or mean something to them? Like that, clearly I have stuff to work through with my parents like that too. In some ways it would be so meaningful, but then it would feel um, there's something really vulnerable about that too, of like being seen by them in ways that I've always wanted, and yet like this is weird. Like I don't know what to do with this. Like this. There's just so many like mixed feelings there that I guess I maybe just avoid it. Yes, and it's the short story that I wrote is called "To Be Seen or Not to Be Seen," and it touches on that struggle. Like in some ways, there's such a longing to be seen, but I also don't always feel safe to be seen, or don't have like that closeness with them, and so it feels like too vulnerable to be seen. Um, So it's like I'm constantly working through that. Definitely, I would say it's like a way of showing a side of me that maybe I haven't had a chance to explore or share before. It's like it's always been important for me to be authentic in all my relationships when it's safe. And so like being a therapist, that feels very authentic to me and really important to me. But the writer side, that creative side, that artist side, yeah, like I have never felt like I had an avenue to share that. And so that's definitely the writing piece, right? It's like and again, I'm loving that exploration of, in some ways, of just still trying to find myself and my voice, because I've never really had that chance to explore that. And I never even really saw myself as like an artist. I still probably has some imposter syndrome, right? Um, am I really an artist? I have, just once, and it was part of my honeymoon. So after I got married, we went to Hawaii, and then we went to Saigon, and then we went to Guangzhou, where my husband is from, and then Hong Kong. And so it was kind of like a part of it, just like, vacation, right? And part of it was like connecting with our roots. He grew up in Guangzhou, but I've never been to China, and so I wanted to see where he grew up, and um, wanted to connect with my roots too. We were only in Saigon for a few days, and that was intentional on my part, mostly because I was afraid if I was there longer, there'd be more pressure for me to visit family members there. So I was like, if I keep it short, maybe they'll get it. I'm on my honeymoon, right? Like I don't have to find someone to take me out to the small towns where like I still have family there. Um, I would love to go back, of course, and to stay longer and like meet the family that I have there. It's always been very important to me. My my oldest brother, who died in Vietnam, he has a grave site, and I would love to be able to go visit him. I think that would mean so much. Um, but it's like they live in a very small rural area, so like there's no street signs. Like you can't Google Map your way there. Or you're gonna need someone to take you there, and there's no address, right? So it's not like I could just go out myself and find these things. And so we just hung out in Saigon and just explored. But yeah, I didn't tell any family members that I was coming because I was worried they would take offense if I didn't want to see them. And yeah, it was a strange experience. In some ways, felt so familiar. In some ways, felt so foreign. Um, I think the first night we were there, like we were kind of jet lagged. I think on the way back from the airport to the hotel, I saw like I think there was like a moped accident, and so there was like someone like lying on the ground. So there's like a lot of things that are kind of like activating. And I get there and have that like weird sense of like this is so it was just overwhelming to like be in like my parents' homeland. In some ways feel like it's mine, in some ways feel like it's not. I think I had like a existential crisis that night. Like it wasn't quite a panic attack, but I felt like the anxiety in my body, and I was like, "What is this? This is so strange." But I think it was just like my body, my brain trying to make sense of this experience. It was I'm glad and it was good, but it's emotional, it's overwhelming. Um, I would like to go again with maybe my brothers. I think that would be like an incredible experience, and to go with their partners and our kids. But I think I wanted people I could process the experience with, um, and like my brothers feel like the best people because like they grew up with me. They would understand a lot of the things. I'm trying to think how it would feel to go with my parents. They have been back. My parents are now divorced. They divorced, I think, the year that I got married. Just interesting. But my dad now lives between Texas and Vietnam, so he goes back and forth um, relatively frequently. My mom has only been back once. She was always a little afraid to go back. She was afraid that um, she would, like, they would not let her leave, basically. I think she's never said this, but I suspect that maybe she was also just afraid of just how overwhelming it would feel, just all the emotions that would come up. Um, she eventually went back when I was a grown up. I think her mom had passed away, and so she went back for her mom's funeral, and she has not been back since. My dad went back for the first time when I was a kid. He went back by himself. Um, and I think that was just that one time until, when I was a grown up, he went back more just on his own. But yeah, we've never all been together. And part of me wants it, a part of me, like, I think it's, again, it's like it would be a really emotional experience, and I just don't feel comfortable sharing my emotions with my parents because all sorts of different reasons. Yeah, I think that's like what's so beautiful is, like, it's like all these different Venn diagrams. Like, there's so many, like, so much overlap between the different stories. There's differences too, but that's where, like, when I was saying, I think it's so important for people to just share their story and identities, because there's space for all of us. It just all looks different, right? It doesn't have to fit all one image. But I'm glad it resonated.